Everybody, Charles Hoskinson here. So I made just a little bit early on the hour, finished my shower list of things to do, but we're getting pretty close to Christmas and I've been moving. As this is more of a personal thing, AMAs, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on my side. We recently moved from 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment to a ranch, and it's a 50-acre ranch. And so as a consequence, it's been a little bit hectic trying to move from one place to the next place. And you've noticed that I have kind of a new office and things are a little different. By popular demand, I am regrowing the beard. And they said, well, you want to see giraffes in the AMA. So I managed to fish a giraffe out of the basement, and there is your giraffe. So I hope you guys enjoy that. Overall, things are going well. Life is good. Holiday seasons are the most stressed in people, but things have been moving along quite well at IOHK, and things have been moving quite a lot well with Cardano. We have a lot of cool things that we're trying to figure out and negotiate. Very soon, we're going to start announcing the IOHK Summit. A little bit about that. So the IOHK Summit is something we do as an annual event, and ordinarily it's just for IOHK employees and invited guests of our ecosystem. So this year we actually did it in January over in Portugal, in Lisbon, which was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it. About 200-300 people showed up. But one thing after we announced it, we noticed hundreds of people reaching out to us saying, you should open this event up to the public, and we would love to attend if it was available. So after some debate and discussion, looks like we're going to move our summit from January to a little later in the year, right at the end of Q1, early Q2, and open it up to the general public. So we'll have a private part of it just for the IOHK employees, but all the IOHK people will be there, every single one, and there'll be a public event, and we'll do lots of public presentations about who we are, what we're doing, and where the company's going, and some interesting ideas. We'll have a lot of special announcements at that event. So things, look for that. That'll probably be the next week or two, maybe 3. Just depends on how long it takes for us to get the website out, and we'll release the website in stages. So IOHK Summit is now a public event coming 2019. Let's see, any other announcements to make? Research is still going well. Lots of papers are working their way through peer review. A lot of papers have been accepted to various things. And we've begun hiring some very specialized cryptographic engineers. We've put out some job ads if people are particularly astute in following those things. And those engineers are going to start implementing some of our more exotic and bespoke protocols. In particular, the SGX stuff, and the other side is the MPC stuff. So you may have noticed papers like Kaleidoscope and Royale and their successors. Those papers are quite interesting and can do lots of really cool, interesting things in the gaming gambling space, but they're a bit complicated because they involve multi-party computation. So we felt it would be nice to hire some very specialized people who think about that stuff on a regular basis, along with zero-knowledge cryptography and trusted hardware, and put them into a special group within the company so we can begin rolling out these next-generation protocols that no one really has and put them into our stack. So we'll make some announcements on that pretty soon. All right, so let's get to the AMA. Let's see what you guys have for me. Ada is dead, Charles. Work for Binance instead. I'm glad to see that we have trolls already inside the chat. Okay, go find another coin then. Okay. Does hosting a slot pool, a stake pool, make you a slot leader, and what are the differences in responsibilities? Okay, so basically how Ouroboros works in a nutshell is that you have this concept of an epoch and you have slots. So an epoch is a bounded period of time. And it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month. Right now we've set it for 5 days. And slots are what you conventionally think about as a block producer. So in a proof of work system, when you win a block and you have the right to make it, that's what we conventionally think of as a slot. So an epoch has a fixed set of slots. In our case of Cardano, there's 20,600 for this version of Ouroboros. Okay, so what happens is at the prior epoch, there's an election. So source of randomness goes into some form of an election scheme. The balls spin, and basically public keys, addresses, are elected to each slot. So slot 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way down to 20,599 are all attached to some address. Now, what occurs is if you win that lottery, if you win that system, you have the right to be a block producer. Okay, so you can either show up, you can not show up, or you can take that right and delegate that right to a third party. And we call that third party a stake pool. Now, the odds are that the vast majority of people are probably not going to set up all the infrastructure necessary and learn how to do all these things. They're just going to want to hand it to somebody else. That's a natural human thing. If we're talking about Africa and many people are on cell phones, it's really unlikely that people are going to run powerful machines to make blocks and start doing all those other things we'd like these slot leaders to do, like act as network relays and hosting Oracle services and payment channels and other layer 2 things that will eventually come down the pipe. So what we're doing is we're building into Daedalus and into our software a delegation center. We've already recently published them on my Twitter feed, GUI scamps of what this is going to look like. But basically, it'll allow a person who wants to run a stake pool to register it. That basically means that they're going to take a bunch of metadata and they're going to issue a special transaction, and a certificate will be posted on the Cardano blockchain that will then be visible to all people in the delegation center. And based upon a variety of factors and lifetime performance of that pool, it'll appear in some configuration in the delegation center. And if you want to give your potential right to participate in the network to one of these pools, you go to that center, you click on the delegate pool that you want, and you go ahead and delegate your stake to them, which will increase statistically their chance of being elected to run slots. So just because someone has X percentage of the ADA in the system, and just because someone has been delegated to, does not necessarily mean that that particular pool or person will be able to actually make slots, because it's a lottery and sometimes you get 10 heads in a row when you're flipping a coin. Okay, so that's the difference between a slot leader and a stake pool and where they all fit out. The advantage of the system is that you kind of create the best of both worlds. You have this implicit decentralization that staking provides, proof of stake provides, because money gets more and more distributed over time. But you also create a class of people that are merit-based within the system that are subject to the forces of a free market, which can be ever decentralized, who are generally enterprise-level actors, meaning they have more powerful computers, they have better internet connections, and eventually, because they're not going to just be able to compete on fees, they're going to have to compete on services, utility, and philosophy, meaning that groups will be able to create stake pools. For example, maybe your favorite advocacy group, like the Guardians of Cardano, or maybe the Cardano Foundation, or maybe an alternative foundation, and use this as a way of generating funding. Or people who say, I'm going to provide value-added services to the system, like be a bridge for atomic cross-chain swaps, or be an entry point for a decentralized exchange, or something like that. So that's the really cool thing about the system, is that we're enabling a blockchain-based way very easily for people to register pools, for people to participate in pools, and for people to make decisions that are either economically motivated or philosophically motivated, or both, and make that user experience as easy as possible. Furthermore, the system like this also allows for people who are using cold wallets to participate in staking. So let's say you have a paper wallet, or you have a ledger device, or something along those lines. Ordinarily, the system would not be able to differentiate between these two sets of people. So if you have a paper wallet or cold wallet, it would look at those addresses and it wouldn't know, oh, that's on a ledger. It'd just say it's an address. So what happens if you get elected? Well, you won't show up because your stake is offline. But with this type of a system, what you're going to be able to do with Daedalus is take your hardware wallet or your cold wallet, and through a procedure, import a staking right into the wallet, not the value keys. So those spending keys are never live within the system, but you can give that right to a key within your system, and then Daedalus can then allow you to delegate that stake to whatever pool you want. So you can keep your spending offline in a safe or wherever you put it, or in a hardware wallet like one of these guys, and you can still be able to participate as if the stake was live. So this is something that this delegation system enables. It's just a safer way of doing things. It's, in our view, a better economic way of doing things, and encourages eventually competition by value add. So layer 2 protocols like Lightning style stuff and Oracle services and matching servers and other things like that that add value, or encourages people to start funding philosophical ideas with services, consensus as a service. So that's the difference. Okay. Will you have a sidechain for security token? That's a really good question. So a security token is then an ERC20 token, namely because there is this notion of regulation that's attached to the token. And some of that regulation lives off-chain in the legacy world, and some of that regulation can be automated. So for example, if you have a stock that you've issued pre-IPO and you're trading amongst accredited investors, you have this idea that only a certain group of people are allowed to possess that asset, insiders and people who are above a certain wealth portfolio within a bounded geography. So you would implicitly have this idea that the addresses within the system, in order to have them created and assets transferred between them, have to go through some notion of compliance. Now, this is antithetical to a completely libertarian open cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Ethereum or ADA, but might be something you'd want to do if you are an issuer who's trying to have a regulated product, but you want to take advantage of the decentralization of the system. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, let's say you want to pay dividends. Instead of having to go through a middleman who takes a fee for those distributions, and if you can't reach people, and there's an achievement process, and there's all these things, like especially with bonds, you can just directly, through a click of a button, issue value to your user base. Let's say you want to communicate with your people and get proof that you sent the message to the person. So for example, you're a company and you're doing an annual disclosure of executive compensation or bonuses or something like that. What you can do is you can actually use those addresses to send an encrypted message and create a protocol that when they encrypt it, they sign it in the process. So you get a return receipt that they've seen the message, they've read the message. So not only are you able to, in a click of a button at no cost, distribute information to all of your shareholders, you're also able to create a communication protocol that when they read the message, you get a signed, non-refutable confirmation that they've actually opened the message. So you can get statistics on how many people are actually reading the things you send to them. These are examples of things that the security tokens world gives us above and beyond just this idea of a decentralized marketplace and liquidity and regulation being automated and so forth. So the question is, will security tokens be a side chain or will they be incumbent within the system? The nature of Plutus and Marlowe makes our system uniquely well suited for people to build an asset that would conform to many of the characteristics I've just mentioned. But there's a question of control, namely who gets to pull the lever and shut off the system. And so the question is, would it be better to have a separate ledger to account for all of these things with certain properties about that ledger in terms of rollbacks and immutability and a different notion of control with that ledger? Or would it make sense to instead have this inherit all the properties that Cardano itself has? For example, this immutability and the timestamp and the auditability and this idea that things don't roll back. It's entirely reasonable to say that that might need to live within its own ledger. And if that's the case, it'd be a sidechain. How easy would that be to set up in our system? Not hard at all. So once CL comes out, we'll have an EVM sidechain, a Yella sidechain, but it would be really nice to get a third-party partner to connect a security token sidechain, and then you can actually have this situation where tokens can be issued there and flow between Cardano and back and so forth. And there are a whole bunch of ideas about how we can whitelist and blacklist and the transferability rules and so forth. So it's something we've been thinking about. Involved in that conversation is also the idea of compliance, which necessarily has the idea of identity. And you have to have an opinion and a philosophy of that, and necessarily the idea of a trusted data feed, because external events have some implications on the system, and also this idea of regulation as well. As a corollary to this topic, there's the idea of escalation of privacy. So ordinarily, You'd like everything to be as private as possible. So when Alice and Bob are doing business with each other, only Alice and Bob should be aware of that transaction, but all outside observers would not be able to link those transactions and that history to Alice and Bob. And for the most part, that's the way markets ought to work. Governments, however, have an opinion that sometimes for the good of society, they need to have a window into those transactions. The danger, as we've seen with Australia and other jurisdictions, is that by having a window, what they mean is we should weaken cryptography to a point where it has an unlimited use, silently used backdoor built into the protocol. And as a consequence, basically, if that key ever gets lost or stolen, a hacker can now have the same God's eye view as the regulator. It's a very dangerous, it's a very stupid thing to do. However, there are ways to construct systems where you can actually build in a threshold backdoor for a particular transaction if certain social consensus is reached, and federate power in a way that it takes quite a bit to get there. And it's done in an open way as opposed to a secret way, like the FBI having a way to decrypt your messages and they can just do it whenever they want to and not tell anybody or get a warrant, for example, to do that. So if you're having a discussion about compliance, you're also having a discussion about identity, you're also having a discussion about privacy and when can you de-anonymize things, who can do that, and what are the conditions to do those things. The security token world is going to live on these types of rules, not on the traditional crypto rules that we are used to with Bitcoin, where we're only going in one particular direction with maximizing freedom, minimizing your exposure of your personal information, and removing all barriers to commerce. You're going to be putting up artificial walls there. So some can be programmed, others may require a ledger, and it really comes down to the conditions of that, whether you're going to roll back, whether you have mutability or not, whether you want auditability and timestamping that be high fidelity or not, and also your opinion about things like identity and privacy and so forth. Okay. Let's see here. This is a good question right here. Charles, some political activists I follow online have been banned from PayPal and even had banks refuse to allow them to open an account. Can crypto somehow become a solution to help these people? So we have within the United States this concept of freedom of expression, freedom of speech. It's a constitutional right. So you can take something regardless of how distasteful this idea is and say it, and you don't have to fear that someone's going to show up on your doorstep and black bag you and throw you into a secret prison because it was inconvenient to some power group. This is the theory. But in practice, society has built an immune system against certain types of speech. If you go around saying terribly racist things or you go around saying terribly offensive things, generally what ends up occurring is people become pariahs. They become socially isolated. They get fired from their jobs. They have difficulty doing business with people. Okay, so for example, there was a large right-wing protest for the extreme right-wing in the East Coast of the United States not too long ago. And these Nazi protesters who were marching with torches had every right in the United States under our Constitution to do that. But if you actually follow what happened from those protests, from that march to today, there were significant social consequences to the people who participated, many of which who were discovered ended up losing their jobs or suffering some sort of recourse. So there's an open libertarian question of, is this okay or not? So in a sense of a libertarian principle, you could say, well, I have a right to decide who I associate with and what I personally feel is right and wrong speech. So if somebody says something that's hurtful to me or offensive to me, I should have a right to disassociate from that person. If I'm walking through a park and I'm of a particular ethnicity and they're saying that my ethnicity causes all the wars in the world, or I'm subhuman and low intelligence, I have every right to say I don't want to talk to that person, do business with that person, or associate with that person. Okay, that's reasonable. Where it becomes problematic is when you start saying, well, there are facets of society that are privatized, that have a huge amount of our influence over our life, liberty, and property. For example, if you make your living on eBay or Airbnb or Uber or on YouTube and you're a content producer, and that's your livelihood, and you're producing a service. And this platform is intrinsically just involved in the act of bringing you together with consumers. And then suddenly, because of your political beliefs, this platform provider decides to deplatform you. For example, recently there's been issues with Patreon, and many YouTube people have been demonetized as a result of their political beliefs. Then you say to yourself, well, on the strictly libertarian side of things, this is technically a private enterprise. And as a result, they have every right as a private enterprise to deplatform somebody. The question then is, well, to what extent does the private enterprise start becoming a social utility? And as a consequence of being a social utility, they're somehow evolved beyond the point of me going through the park or you going through the park, and now like a government institution, like a court or a library controlled by the county, where they're now subject to constitutional restrictions and thus must tolerate your speech or your expressions regardless of how distasteful. And that's actually where I think cryptocurrencies are uniquely well suited to actually help us get out of this dilemma in the 21st century. Because right now we're left with this terrible dichotomy where either we err on the side of saying everything is personal and private companies have the right to their own expression, or we say these things are public utilities and regulated as such, and we're handing our expression to bureaucrats for these massive platforms they don't really understand well. We can choose the third option of saying decided markets that attach buyers and sellers, whether you're renting out space in your home or capacity in your car or your free expression, and put them into protocols. Protocols are intrinsically neutral. They look a lot like governments in terms of their operation. No one's can control, they're decentralized, yet they behave much more like private entities in terms of their efficiency, their ability to update and evolve and upgrade, and the competitive nature. So you're taking the best of the free market and you're combining it with the best of principles that we have left behind, putting it the DNA of these types of systems. So I'm deeply concerned about it. I think that as we move into the 21st century, more and more of our life is controlled by algorithms and data. And if companies start making algorithmic decisions based upon some preconceived schema, or they're just cowards and they don't want to offend a very small radical minority, and as a result, they deplatform an entire political philosophy, I think that we need to have a third option. And that option are cryptocurrency protocols. So what does it mean? It means that we will now be able, as a society, to tolerate a group of people who we feel are distasteful, but their mere presence in the conversation does force us to analyze. And occasionally those distasteful people are right. And occasionally those distasteful people affect social change to ensure that our systems do not become tyrannical, or that institutions that ought not to be socialized and taken over by the government stay private, but are no longer, in many cases, necessary to facilitate the protection of our life, liberty, and property. So it is something we're concerned about. As a company, we are involved in it, and we will be releasing some products at some point specifically along these lines. And I think that these products will be among our most successful and have a lot of social benefit. So what else we got here? Okay, the topic of shorter addresses, that's a really interesting topic because it's something that the cryptocurrency space as a whole has thought about for a very long time. So an address requires a certain minimum viable amount of information within it to be functional within a system. So you first want a property that addresses don't collide, so that when you create an address, I create an address, there is, statistically speaking, an insignificant chance that we're accidentally going to create the same address. It would be pretty catastrophic because we'd end up sending money to each other. We wouldn't even realize that. It's a race condition for who can withdraw first. Okay, so that's one dimension of it. Another dimension of it is that you'd like the address to be useful in different contexts. So one in context is this concept of I'd like to spend the money. But as we can already see within Cardano, we have this differentiation between your right of expression of your money and the spending of your money, the transfer of that expression to someone else. So for example, with delegation, but inevitably we'll have a voting system connected to this as well. The more utility that you put into an address, the more data has to be in that address by information theoretic minimums to be able to ensure that you don't have those collisions. That said, it is entirely possible, regardless of the size of the address, to create what's called an aliasing system. This is what we mean by human readability or human understandability. So basically, an alias system is where you take an address and you register that address, or with an HD wallet, a generator that can be used to create an arbitrarily large family of addresses, and you would register that with a human readable name. Kind of like a domain name where you have an IP representation, but then we have this thing like google.com or youtube.com or so forth. So in an ideal world, you would permit a system that first is as conservative as possible with the address size, so we save space, but still maximally functional. At the same time, would allow you to take that or an HD wallet and then register that as an alias that is human understandable, like Charles's wallet. Or eBay will count, something like that. Now, what this does is it actually creates the same situation we had with ICANN and domain names, a race for people to register if you permit this behavior. In my opinion, for this to be useful, we also need some notion of a pub-sub protocol and also a metadata exchange. So what that functionally will mean is that in addition to being able to register an address, you can also register an identity and a communication channel that you can allow people to talk to each other. So in the future, if you imagine multi-sig, right now, how does that work if you're on Copay? You have Copay as this trusted central server. People create accounts with it. And then when you create a keychain, you share those credentials out of band. And then Copay can help people reconstruct an HD address, a multi-sig address for those wallets. So basically, Alice, Bob, and Jim will all get throughout some process information that all three should participate in a multi-sig, and then the construction of that will be done through this trusted central server. You could register things and you could use pub-sub. You'd be able to do this in a completely decentralized way without a trusted server. So something we think about, something we're going to do, but it does take a little bit of time to get there. And one of the things we wanted to do before we got there was first have a really deep understanding of how expressive our UTXO model was going to be. So we needed to create Plutus and Marlowe for that. Second, we needed to have a really good understanding of how we wanted to handle both delegation and voting. These are the ingredients that go into address complexity. Once you have those things, you layer a good network protocol on top of that, then you'll eventually be able to register some form of an HD wallet or an identity into the system, and then people can alias. So what does it change your user experience to? You'd have a friends list within Daedalus. You'd be able to see all of the organizations and friends. You would make sure that you would assign trust to them. So it's much like Web of Trust, or you'd have curated lists that would be able to share these types of things. And if you trust a third party, you can import their list. And then you'd have all these channels where you would be able to communicate with them in a secure way using forward security, just like you do over a Signal protocol or these things, but then also send value to these people through those particular channels. So you'd be able to communicate and send value and coordinate with them through various means. And these ingredients alone are also very pivotal for protocols where you think about social elements. Like, for example, you have a poker protocol on your system, like Kaleidoscope. You'd have your friends lists. You'd want to play with them. You'd be able to ping them, see if they reply. If they reply, then you know they're online. And then you could use that as a way to match people to off-chain participate in the game, play in the game, coordinate through that channel. When they're done, shut it off, collect their winnings and losses. And everything just sorts its way out. And because everybody knows each other and they've all shared this information, you can use the blockchain as a broker. It's just a so much more efficient model. So that kind of a thing is coming. It's something we know how to do. It's not really elegant from a cryptography viewpoint. It's using primitives that are quite old from the 1980s and 90s. It's just a situation where you need to have a lot of engineering and a lot of progress in place before you get there. So we needed to create the extended UTXO model. We also needed to create a variety of things related to delegation and so forth to functionally get there. But it's on the way. Okay, so this is a question. I've completely disabled all AV, stuck at 0% restoration for a day. You know, I've gotten this question a lot, and what I think the issue is that some subset of our users have a corrupt block database. So what's happened is somehow, some way, while retrieving blocks and going through the updates and these things, your block database got corrupted. And if you look at the way that we handle migration epic by epic on the old database to the new database, if there's a corrupt block, there is a potential that this process could get hung into either a very slow or infinite process, meaning it never completes. So we're going to issue some sort of QA statement about this probably pretty soon. We're looking into it. We have a dedicated channel in our Slack. The short-term solution would be probably purging the database manually, and we could issue instructions on how to do that safely. The long-term solution would be putting some sort of database integrity check inside Daedalus itself. So it would be a utility that you'd be able to check your database and verify that the database actually is not damaged. And if it is damaged, have a repair utility which will find which blocks are malformed, delete them, and then pull those blocks in to regenerate the database correctly. So that's probably why some people are having an issue. If it's slow but it's progressing, the other option is the antivirus, because this is a disk-intensive process. You're doing lots of I/O, where you're moving files from A to B. You're compressing really fast PCI Express SSD, like one of those Samsung Evos. It's going to run great. It's going to be very quick. If you have an old mechanical hard disk, one of those 5,400 RPM disks you saw on the old laptops, you're in it for several days. So if it's really slow but progressing, it's either something's interfering with it, like an antivirus, or you have old hardware that's most likely culprit. If it's not progressing at all, it probably is a block corruption. So we'll issue some sort of statement about that and give some mediations for that. Our help desk is looking into it. Okay. Charles, how do you feel about EOS? Come on, guys. Thank you for the Christmas levity. Let's see here. Will staking be possible on a mobile version of Yoroi from the Cardano effect? I have talked to Sebastian and Nico about this. So we're having a summit about delegation and basically what the delegation spec is. And that summit's invitation only for Cardano developers. So we've invited Yoroi's developers, IWHK is coming as well. So the Rust team and the Haskell team, and we'll see if we can get the Vacuum Labs guys there. But basically, this is all about, here's the spec, here's how the spec works, here's how we're going to implement it. And this is what the standard needs to be. So if you want to write a wallet that's compliant, as long as you follow this, that's a contract that yours will work with ours and network will recognize it. Okay, so that's the basic concept. That's where we're at. And that summit's 9th to 10th of January. So my hope is on the back of that, that we can get a strong commitment from Emergo to guarantee that there will be support for delegation in the Yoroi interface. And I don't see any reason why that wouldn't happen. But anyway, the summit's then, and it's up to that company to make the announcement. But our hope is to have multiple wallets with different visions implementing these functionalities and features so that everybody in the ecosystem, regardless of the wallet they choose to use, will have a great user experience and be able to express themselves, their will. Okay, from Tom Mara, can you talk about ADA and ETC and have some plans you have with interaction between the two? ETC has been a very frustrating project for me. We as a company invested a lot of time, effort, money, brand, and frankly, goodwill into trying to build up the ETC ecosystem. We hired community managers, podcasters, developers. I went to many events. We always spoke positively of the ecosystem. And our hope was that at some point, reasonable minds would prevail and that the ETC community would understand that to survive, it must innovate. We already have a principled cryptocurrency. It's called Bitcoin. It's very principled. And within the next 3 to 5 years, it will have smart contract capability and sidechain capability and be quite performant. There are literally hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D and engineering money with multiple companies all around the world working very hard to get Bitcoin to a very solid state. Certain things won't be changed. The consensus algorithm won't be changed, and a lot of things are going to have to be pigeonholed in that will make Bitcoin suboptimal for a large host of applications. So that is a position where if you can take those things that it's likely not to be competitive with, a particular IoT, and run those things better, you at least have a hope to do something interesting. So my first argument was, we as an ecosystem need to embrace a treasury model. Here's what happened. We published a spec. We did a year's worth of research. We spent a lot of money and time and effort on it. Hit pieces were written about me and my company. ETC Dev said, never going to happen, ever. You'll have to fork the network if you do this. And at the time, they controlled the two majority clients, Parity and Geth. And basically, a lot of people said, you're trying to solve a problem that we don't have. We have plenty of money. We have plenty of funding. Our roadmap's great. We're going to create our own governance system. So let's go create a foundation. I said, well, guys, the whole reason we're in this place is because we had a foundation that we disagreed with. So we're just going to be solving the problem of a tyrannical foundation we disagree with by creating another foundation, and somehow we're going to be more honest and more moral and more just. So we didn't get the treasury system in. We had ideas about sidechains. They were criticized. We had ideas about sharding the consensus algorithm, creating more useful proof of work system. They were also criticized. So we still participated. We put a lot of money into Mantis. We created Mantis. In my view, it's the best Ethereum client ever made, period. Ethereum Classic. It's 15,000 lines of code. It's very concise. It's extremely well designed. It's performant. It's bug-free. It's security audited by a third party, Kadelsky, and that report is public. Honestly, you couldn't ask for more for a 1.0 product that was built from scratch for our ecosystem. And the response from some in the community is, it was an unnecessary product. No one uses it. And now that IOHK is starting to financially pull away from the ecosystem, good riddance. So I'd like to believe that there's still lots of people in the Ethereum Classic community that have a good relationship with us and think we're good people and want to work with us. And I will make every effort to collaborate with those people. But I will warn any cryptocurrency. There are over 1,000 viable cryptocurrencies floating around the marketplace, many with lots of money, lots of philosophy, and lots of adherence. No one has to use your cryptocurrency. No one is entitled to anything. In a year or two, everything can change. Go to CoinMarketCap from 2000, I think 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, into today. And look who was in the top 15. And look at who's in the top 15 now. Things change fast here. And the only way you survive is if you build a good community, an honest community, a transparent community, an open community that is appreciative of outside contributions and outside ideas. And don't view an alternative team with an alternative vision as a threat, but rather as an opportunity to broaden your ecosystem and make it better. If you build an ecosystem that's insular, says not invented here, or this is the only way we're doing things and screw everybody else, you're basically going to climb way ladder until eventually you're no longer relevant and no one cares at all about you. So that's the threat. It was very hurtful, the things that were said repeatedly, year after year. We took it for a long time because I really honestly believe in the principles. And at some point, you just have to make decisions about where you want to be and where you want to go. So we'll try to work out a compromise. We'll try to figure something out that allows us to continue moving forward and do right by the people in that ecosystem. But God, I got to tell you, there are days I woke up where I said, screw these guys. And if I'm saying it, other people are saying it. And if you're a third-party dApp developer trying to make a decision, where do I go? You're just shooting yourself in the foot whenever you make people feel that way. Charles, how easy will it be for projects on Ethereum to switch over to ADA? So there are two schools of thought, and actually they're philosophically represented by two completely different frameworks within the same Cardano ecosystem. One school of thought is that most of what has been deployed on Ethereum, while well-intended, doesn't really have viability or a good business model behind it. Rather, they live in the prototyping or proof of concept phase. And there's going to need to be considerable redesign, re-architecting, and in some cases, just complete recoding of what's been done to make it eventually work in the future. So in other words, you create this idea of the operating system, people deploy a lot of apps on it, but then you go to a completely different type of system and they're just not compatible with each other. So the migration requires people to rewrite all their code. Like for example, when we went from DOS to Windows, it's going from one to the other was hard. It was very expensive and time consuming, but people recognized that the GUI idea, the 32-bit operating system, real cool. It's a real good idea. It adds a lot of value. So retooling, rewriting, recoding made sense. That's one dimension of it. And the goal there is to try to make that transition as easy as possible. That's reflected with the Plutus mindset within our organization, where we say there's just a fundamentally different way to write these types of applications, which is more elegant, more secure, lower cost to maintain, and more realistic with how these systems are actually being deployed. So we have Haskell, Plutus, Marlowe, runs the client server and blockchain, and there's lots of things we can do within that model to make those things easy. And what you do is you populate your dApp framework with a group of people who are familiar with those techniques as your loading set. And you don't need 1 million developers to be able to make a huge impact. You need 500 to 1,000 vigilant groups, geographically well distributed, to build successful things. And the economic success of those things will encourage many people to come into the platform as copycats. For example, with the iPhone, it's a totally different paradigm. It's a totally different way of doing things than the way things were done with Windows. So Steve Jobs funded a bootstrapping of people to enter his ecosystem. And then when they started making money, they started getting users. Everybody said, wow, that's a good ecosystem. I should do something in that too. It was a time-consuming, expensive retooling, but the paradigm was so compelling. And the idea that there's all this value there drove lots of people into that gold rush. So you need a loading set that knows what they're doing with good tools and good principles, and get them out and get them to be commercially viable and learn from what's come before. The other school of thought is that if an ecosystem gets too big, you're not going to be able to displace this ecosystem. It's going to be there, and that's the standard, but then it's just interoperability with that standard. So that's what Yella is all about, where you can take Solidity code and compile it to run on our system. And at the end of the day, if that's the standard, well, then we're going to support that. And then it's an argument of security, performance, and operational cost. If you're a dApp developer, maybe the initial set, because they were ICO funded, are Ether guys, but if this is actually going to be a real ecosystem, you're viewing Ethereum as infrastructure, like Amazon Web Services or Rackspace, okay? And if you view that, then it's a game of, do I trust the platform to do what it says it's going to do? Do I trust the reliability? And am I okay with the security and operating cost of it? So you're making an infrastructure argument, if that's indeed the standard. We don't know. So what we did is we took our money and we actually created two completely independent teams and gave them mandates to pursue both these threads and allow Cardano to support both of these threads. So if for whatever reason that ends up becoming the standard in the market and we have to live in this real hell that's insecure and bad, at least we'll try to give you a glass of water in hell. And maybe it'll have some ice cubes in it. If we're right and we think that we're due for a new paradigm, Plutus will take off and become the successful paradigm and be able to go off and convince people that this is the better way of doing things. But in both cases, we have those grounds covered. So the answer is it'll be quite easy. It will support Web3. We support Solidity. You just take your application, you take the tools you're used to using, like Truffle and Remix and so forth, compile, run it on our system. When can you do that? Today. We already have two testnets, a KVM and Yella testnet. We have a command line interface with Mallet. You can download those testnets. You can take your app, run it on our system. We'd love you to do that. And come back to us and tell us what your experience was like and what you learned from it and so forth. We will be dramatically enhancing the capabilities of Yella throughout 2019. K to LLVM backend, semantic space compilation, a better surface language for Yella, so syntactic sugar, so if you can write directly in that command line, that assembly-like language, which is kind of like C, and more language pairing. So you should be able to go from JavaScript to Yella, Lua to Yella, and so forth. And then SBC will give lots of language interoperability, so traditional developers can come on in. And all that enhanced Ethereum tooling will just be ported over, and it's open source. No one can stop us from doing that. And then we can just make an argument that it's faster, cheaper, safer to run on our system than it is on the Ethereum system. And a lot of people will end up agreeing with us on that. And so we'll get some from that channel. We'll get some from that initial channel. And if there's money to be made, the markets will bring people into the system. Does Ada have any plans for a dApp platform? Yes, we do. Daedalus was always built with the intention of being a dApp platform. It's right now Cardano Wallet, and that's all you can do with it. But what's going to happen over 2019 is you're going to see a series of evolutions with Daedalus, where a lot of things are going to occur to Daedalus to just make it awesome. First off, we're going to see a terminal work its way into Daedalus. And that terminal is going to be very verbose. It's going to let you do lots of amazing things. Directly talk to the Cardano Wallet backend, manually construct transactions, do your UTXO, all of these great things. Just beautiful thing. People are going to be real happy with it. It's going to be insanely great. The best terminal ever done. And we have some great plans for how to do that. But then you're going to start being able to use that to submit smart contracts to the chain. Like you can use Mallet with the Mantis client to do that. And then gradually, we're going to wake up and Daedalus is just going to change. And you'll say, wait, where did my Cardano wallet go? And you'll say, wait a minute, I see an app store like Google Play. Whoa, and Cardano Wallet is an app. And I just click a button and suddenly I have my wallet back. Great. But wait a minute, there's also an ETC wallet. And there's also now Kaleidoscope running as a dApp. Well, that's really cool. Well, how do we accommodate that? You can take that Haskell and use GHCJS to convert it to JavaScript, and then it becomes a node package. And Electron, the platform we built Daedalus on, allows you to have node packages and Chrome applications running, and also includes WebAssembly. So that platform, a universal dApp platform, and we'll have a store where people can submit in a decentralized way their applications, whether they be dApps, wallets, or explorers, or whatever infrastructure, and basically create a user experience where there's one-click install. And it's platform agnostic. So that means that you can use it for Ethereum, you can use it for Cardano, or other platforms. That's the vision. We have containerization experts we've hired and other people we've hired, we brought in. They've been working at Skunkworks for months and months and months, thinking about how to make this model work both within Electron and outside of Electron and containers, communicating with each other, experimenting with GraphQL. We've been looking at a lot of really cool ideas about how to accommodate this. But overall, the concept basically is that we are converging to a point where Daedalus will become that CAP store. And that's, I think, one of the last miles for broad consumer adoption, to say that if you're going to have a DApp, it's easy to get it like a cell phone application. It's one-click install. It's right there. As a developer, it's easy to deploy because you can use the web tools that you've come to know and love. And you've segregated your blockchain code from your client code from the server code that you're connected to. That triangle is preserved, and it all just makes sense. You have a very beautiful way of distributing, and there's no walled garden. You can charge and have a payment system. That's where trusted hardware is really cool, because you can have this idea that certain things will only load up if you have an access token, and that token can be controlled within trusted hardware enclaves. So you can put in DRM into the system if you want. You can go far down that rabbit hole as you go, and there's no Apple or Google lording over it saying, we're in charge of this whole thing. We get to decide what's legitimate, what's not. That's the vision. And we're building that right now. We have a whole team on it. They've been on it for quite some time. So this is an interesting one. How do you compete against current modes of payments like credit cards and these types of things? You know, the thing about the legacy financial world is it's both brilliant and it's also dumb. It's brilliant from the perspective that somehow, some way, hook or crook, we as human beings have managed to construct a system where billions of people are able to engage in very elegant commercial transactions with each other of arbitrary complexity. I can just go to Amazon and buy stuff. I can send PayPal payments to my contractor who's doing the walls on my house. I can just do all this stuff and people get paid. And it's one of those things where if it works fast, it works well, there's accountability, there's recovery, and I'm happy. And at the same time, when the system doesn't work, it is miserable. It is exclusive. It's culturally damaging. So, for example, there's a war on cash. Many people who live in cash economies are being discriminated against. They're not able to pay for large purchases with cash. If they get caught with large amounts of cash, the government takes it from them through something called civil asset forfeiture. There's a litany of examples in the United States, Europe, and in some countries, it's even becoming illegal to possess cash above a certain amount. So over an arc of time, those who wish to live in this economy are being discriminated against. There's a collection of people, including in the United States, who are unbanked, can't get a bank account, or it's too expensive for them to get a bank account, or they live in an area where there's only one option, and that option, for whatever reason, doesn't work for them, in which case they have to go to these money centers and pay high fees to cash a paycheck, high fees to be able to conduct basic commerce or send money to people. They're basically pushed out of the world financial system. Furthermore, earlier in the conversation, we were mentioning this concept of deplatforming. Let's say you want to make money, and let's say that Patreon is your source of revenue. And because of your political beliefs, Visa or MasterCard go to them and say, we will pull our support from your platform, no longer allow you to process payments on our systems unless you get rid of Bob. So you get a call from them saying, sorry, we got to get rid of you. No, we've been pushed into this. In fact, if you look at bank behavior or financial intermediary behavior, oftentimes that behavior is made not because of a direct request from a regulator, but rather a perception that doing business with certain actors could endanger their correspondent bank relationships or their relationships with other money service businesses, like Visa or MasterCard, for example. So they say, I can't give that marijuana dispensary a bank account. State of Colorado, it's perfectly legal. We can do that. We can process their payments. But if I do that, what happens to my correspondent relationships outside of the state, for example? So given that, cryptocurrencies act as a viable future cash, that last option that basically you always have in your back pocket that you always know is going to work. If somebody comes to fix my car, at least today, I can go and hand them whatever that is in $100 bills, and I've never met a person that ain't going to accept that. Maybe one day they won't, but right now they will. Similarly, eventually cryptocurrencies will become that option that you always have. So if you get cut off, you still have that channel where people can pay. The difference is carrying large amounts of cash is dangerous to store, dangerous to transport, can be confiscated. Crypto, it's all up here. It's all on devices like these guys. It lives in the cloud, and you know it's there, and it's globally accessible, no matter where you're at in the world. So in a way, this is a counter reaction from society to protect us from those who are trying to use our financial lives to control our opinions, our philosophy, and our expressions. It protects us from that. It also ensures that our life, liberty, and property still can move. The really cool thing is it's not just cash. All of your cash-like assets, your equities, your stocks, your bonds, your property, like your house, can also live in the same medium, be transnational and subject to an international understanding as opposed to a national understanding. That's a really cool thing. So I think that's how you compete. You say, well, there's always going to be systems that are fast and have recovery built in, and people like them, but we have cash for a very good reason. Government's killing cash. This is the new cash. And this new cash is not controlled by the government. And we need that option for a free society to preserve itself. It's an interesting question that's been asked. Simple question. Why do those very, very big, powerful banks and governments would allow a decentralized system? Well, governments and banks and these guys wouldn't like the internet. The problem with these systems is that they creep up on you, and you can't get global coordination fast enough to control or ban them. So they end up getting in the hands of consumers. Consumers understand why these things are important. And by the time you'd like to regulate the system, it's already too spread out. The idea is already there. It's already too powerful. For example, this concept of democracy. The world didn't just magically go to democracy and everybody said, oh, that's a great idea, let's just go do it. It happened in a certain few places like the United States, later France, and monarchs were saying, wow, this democracy thing's a real bad idea, because apparently the very people that were oppressing and taxing and treating really badly could somehow get together and vote us out. Whoa, that's not good. We can't allow that to happen. And these are the people that had all the armies. These are the people that had all the resources and led the world for thousands of years. Yet, decade by decade, their power eroded away, and now the majority of the world does live under some form of a representative system. And there's a constant tension between the two. So in one dimension, if you have a good idea and that good idea increases our life, liberty, and property, spreads our freedom, that idea is intrinsically able to inculcate itself within the minds of many people and incubate to a point where it can't be displaced. The minute you've exposed somebody to the concept of rule by the people, the concept of rule by the king just is antithetical to everything you stand for. You say, I don't want this birthright person that I didn't have any say in, just having total dominion over my life. I'd like to have some say over that. And the minute that you say, wow, you're going to have insurance and loans and capital markets and money live in a way that does not require these corrupt, evil middlemen to control them, then people start realizing that this is something that they need to have. Now, not everybody gets it, just like not everybody gets freedom. There's still people who live under terrible dictatorships, and similarly, there's still people who live under economic dictatorships. But at least one country will open the doors and allow these things to exist. And because it lives in the internet, which is also open, it will continue to grow and fester and thrive to a point that eventually erodes away at these institutions. Not because it anarchistically brings them down like a revolution, it erodes away at them because they are less efficient than these new systems. And on a pure competitive basis, they lose. There's no greater example of that than what the internet's done to journalism and the media. You have this concept of hierarchical control over the flow of information and the idea of what's legitimate and what's not. And little by little, all of a sudden, the citizen can become their own journalist and report their own news. And we now see every year newspapers, television channels, other venues go extinct or require government subsidies or have to diverge to a different business model to stay open. So they went in from a 50-year period from the people who get to decide what's real, what's not real, correct information, what's not correct information, who's legitimate, who's not legitimate, to running out of money. And now desperate for a bailout, desperate to stay relevant and survive. And the next generation will even put more pressure on them. There is no difference between that institution and the banks, and frankly, governments in many respects. So competition and markets will erode away at those power bases. It's inevitable. It's the laws of market physics, dynamics of how human beings work. Is it an easy process? Of course not. Is it a process that is just gradual and no hardship or pain? No. In fact, till 1992, it was illegal to sell things on the internet. It's called the NSFAUP, the National Science Foundation Acceptable Use Policy. So you're going to have ups and downs, regulations that make no sense, dinosaurs trying to fight against extinction, but that's just how the world works, and we just have to accept it and have the courage to face it. Could you elaborate on your storage card you've shown twice? So this is a hardware wallet called Tangem, T-A-N-G-E-M. I've mentioned it previously. I'll bring it a little closer to the camera so you guys can see it. So basically what this thing is it's a credit card size. It's got a trusted hardware module on it. It costs very little to make, like $1. And how it works is that you bring it up to your phone, and it operates on NFC. So basically I have my phone open here. You can see my phone. And you just hold it onto the back of the phone like this, and it brings up a wallet. And there you go. Here's your cryptocurrency wallet. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. And so basically, you can spend from it and so forth. So we're currently in negotiations with the company to create a variant of this for ADA. And it'll be a very low-cost, easy-to-distribute wallet for Cardano, and our hope is to have a multi-sig variant of it so we can sell them in a 2-pack. So you have a spending version which has a PIN code with it. You can carry around with you like a credit card, and you, on the mobile version of Cardano's wallet, which will eventually come out soon, you'll just be able to tap it on the back of your phone, brings up the account, and you can just authorize the payment and enter your PIN code. And if your wallet's stolen or you lose it or you forget your PIN, you have a second card. We'll make it a different color. We call it the recovery card. And you leave that in a safe somewhere at home, a safety deposit box, wherever that might be. And you can just use that to move the funds because it's a 1 of 2 multi-sig. And as long as no one gets your PIN code for the spending card, basically have this nice security model. And the cost to sell both of those cards is very little, and the cards are fairly durable, and they're NFC and so forth. So it's important to have a spectrum of hardware devices if you intend on the ecosystem growing and actually having great user experience. It's nice to have a low-cost solution that allows you to conduct commerce just like you would with a credit card and be easy to use and interface with your phone in the ways that you want. And it's nice to have a very feature-rich, powerful, programmable hardware module like a ledger device, for example, where you can always add new features and functionality and so forth. So that's what we're doing right now. We're still in negotiations, but I hope we can get it done, and we'll buy a lot of them and give them away at the summit that we have. And it'll be open on the market, and people can just buy it through white-labeled sources like Crypto Supreme and other places. Okay. See what else we got here. It's a Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. How do you see the role of the Cardano Foundation in 2019 now that Nathan Kaiser is the chairman? Will we see significant partnerships with governments and banks? So first, it's very important to understand who Nathan Kaiser is. He's a great human being. At the Harvard Bird, it's a leading edge think group within Harvard Law School that has been on the forefront of the intersection between law and digital concerns. So, for example, they were the ones who really came up with the Creative Commons license, and they think a lot about the emergence of cryptocurrencies and what that does on traditional legal structures. So he's a domain expert. He's Swiss, but he speaks fluent Chinese, French, German, Swiss, German, English. Really brilliant guy and great lawyer and just a good human being. So I have the utmost confidence in him. Memit Singh from Mergo, he's chief investment officer there and has literally spent over a year of his life now looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of ventures who are trying to get funding and trying to participate in the Cardano ecosystem. So he has a deep understanding of where this ecosystem can go with proper investment. And Domino is an independent party in Switzerland, financial expert, leading expert in how banking works, and just a great guy as well. One of the most eloquent people I've ever met. So this is a interim board, and the point of this board is first to clean up the mistakes of the past and make sure that the sins of the past don't in any way prevent Cardano from becoming a great protocol in the future and continuing to grow. Second, this group is mandated with getting the foundation restarted, getting the community management set up, the idea of Cardano ambassadors, the Cardano hub, and the idea of empowering podcasts and meetup groups to form so that we can organically get a great community going and make sure that those people who are really loyal, the Miyatakis of the world, who have done wonderful work, for example, in Japan, or the Erica Kangs, who have done great work in Korea, get resources in their hands so that they're capable of scaling what they've already done to new levels and bring a wonderful bottom-up community in preparation for the Cardano improvement proposal process, delegation, and for voting on treasury proposals. In addition to that, there's the regulatory outreach side of things. So this system is going to touch many, many regulated markets. We go to Mongolia, and they have hundreds of billions of dollars of natural resources in that country that is just right there waiting to be utilized for the betterment of that country. So the next generation doesn't have to have the worst air in the world, and the next generation doesn't have to spend 4 hours going 20 kilometers from the airport to a hotel in the city because the traffic is so bad. And do this in a sustainable, responsible, corruption-free way. Those products will be regulated and will trade on regulated global marketplaces. How will that go from idea to reality? This was one of the reasons the foundation was created, was to enable these types of situations to have a clear roadmap, step by step by step by step, so that eventually you could wake up in a reality where these things can be unlocked and create liquidity. And if not there, then in Ethiopia, where the prime minister is a cryptographer, the only one in the entire world who's a cryptographer, broke codes during the Eritrean War, wrote papers on symmetric crypto, gets cryptocurrencies better than anyone else, any prime minister in the world. It's the same in Rwanda. It's the same in Uganda. It's the same in Angola. It's the same in Venezuela. It's the same in Chile. It's the same in Argentina. In every single one of those cases, there's a story behind where they want to go and where they're at. And there needs to be a shepherd to help navigate those markets and deal with not only local regulation, but the geopolitical consequences of creating liquidity for the 3 billion people who don't have it, and an expression for the billions of people who don't have it or are actively oppressed. And then there are things like, for example, liquidity, getting exchange listings in Japan and making the FSA like the product, getting exchange listing throughout the world, including Coinbase and other places. Without an entity like the foundation power to do that, it's always a half measure and it's a half effort, because you need that organization with that status of being a not-for-profit and the voice of the community, legitimized by the community, to go and get these things done. So that council's job will be to basically initiate these processes, get them started, so that when permanent board members are selected, those board members can then take those threads to the next level, and they clearly understand the point, the direction, and the purpose of why the foundation was created. It was not created to empower or enrich a small group of people or to be a piggy bank to be used for personal gain. That's antithetical to every single thing we stand for and why that organization exists, and why the Guardians of Cardano were created was to correct that injustice in the ecosystem. And so the new board needs to lay some foundations to make sure that that becomes encoded into the DNA of the organization, so that when custodians come, the conversations around how do we take it to the next level? How do we make it faster, better, more democratic? How do we go ahead and grow this so that it has a bigger influence, and ensure that competition occurs so that if they can't get it done, someone else can get it done? So basically, I think it's a very significant change. It's not felt immediately in the beginning because it's a huge task and a lot has to be done. But now, for the first time in a long time, we're having good conversations. We're having the ability to actually engage in productive dialogues that don't regress and get cut off. And for the first time ever, when people send emails and saying, hey, maybe we could do something, there's at least somebody on the other end who's reading it and cares about it and eventually will reply to it. So I'm very excited about that. And I think it's a good thing for the entire community and the ecosystem as a whole. Okay. So I love these questions. Charles, why was the max supply of ADA 45 billion chosen instead of a smaller supply, considering Bitcoin is 21 million? What's so extraordinary to me is the arbitrariness of this decision, and how people just don't seem to comprehend that we're playing with decimal points. So if anyone conceptually thinks there's too much ADA in circulation, I'd like you to do this. Instead of thinking about ADA, let's create a new currency. We'll call it Killa ADA. And instead of there being 45 billion, there's only 45 million of them. And it's worth 1,000 times more than ADA. So instead of 4 cents, it's worth a lot more. Would you say, wow, that's the currency for me? Well, you can just do that. You take your ADA and you move the decimal point. In Bitcoin, you can do the exact same thing. You say, no, there's not enough Bitcoin in circulation. So instead of having 21 million Bitcoin, let's have 21 billion Bitcoin. And we'll call them millibitcoins. There you go, millibits. And now we have 21 billion. We've moved the decimal points, and it's worth 1,000 times less. So it's math. You can just move one direction or the other. It has no effect or bearing on the price. Investing based upon this, those people are not the people you should be listening to, and those people are not the people that should be driving the price of the system up and down. The price should come with people's adherence to the philosophy and vision of the system, the governance of the system, and the actual consumption and real use case and utility of the system. Like gasoline. No one looks at gasoline and says, well, there's just too many gallons of gasoline in circulation. We need to cut it down a little bit by a factor of 10. There you go. Or have a gasoline burn. Let's go set half the world's supply of gas on fire so we can make the price of gas go up. It's insanity. It's utility. It's commodity. You use it to do stuff. And ADA is much the same way. If we do our job right, we have this beautiful dApp store and tens of thousands of dApps that are running. ADA is the fuel there. And that fuel will run that decentralized infrastructure. And it will enable things that couldn't have been enabled before in ways that couldn't be done before. And by natural consequence of consumption of that, just like when Ford puts more cars on the road, just like when you see more tractor trailers hauling things, just like when you see more power plants burning natural gas, the price of these things go up because you have more demand relative to supply. And people take bets on that. But it doesn't automatically just change because we decided to move a decimal point. That's meaningless, and that's not what ought to guide marketplaces. So if you think there's too many ADA, go buy Killa ADA and tell me how great your portfolio is doing. I hear you can get it at a great price. Can we donate to the Cardano Foundation? You see, that to me is terribly broken. You know, we have this thing called PBS. We have things like NPR in the United States and like public broadcasting and national public radio. And they run these donation-a-thons. They say, if you believe in Sesame Street and you like our programming, donate money to us and call in, give us some money. And every year they do it. It's in your face. It's annoying as heck. And they spend a considerable amount of effort going down that road. And you know what we need to, I think, move to is instead of a model where we wake up and try to beg certain people to give us money to keep things going, which never is enough, we need to move into a model where we have this concept of the people's money. And we have this with governments. We have a budget. We have a treasury. You know, the government, the United States, we tax people. We take the money, we put it into the government, and the Congress gets together and they create a budget and they say, what are we going to spend the people's money on? But the great thing about cryptocurrencies is that instead of a congressman in control of this, you will be in control of the people's money. If you hold ADA, or if you're a Dash, you will Dash, any system that has a treasury. And then people can come and say, I want X dollars of value to go do Y. So the Cardano Foundation, they'll go and say, we've spent all of our initial funding, or we're drawing down on it, we need some money. We're submitting a treasury ballot for $2 million worth of ADA to pay for operations throughout this fiscal year. Okay, then here's the beautiful thing. You as ADA holders will look at that request and say, well, did they do their job? What KPIs should we be looking at? Just like the congressman has to look at the US budget and say, well, yeah, this money we want to give to this organization, you know, are they capable of doing this? Or this department, Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, the Education Department, are they using the money correctly? And if they're not, well, what are we going to do about it? Leadership changes. Maybe we'll have budget changes. Maybe we'll have deprioritization of certain programs, line items saying we're only going to fund X but not Y. You get to decide that. And the funder and fundee, they can have a two-way conversation and competition occurs. So wouldn't it be better, instead of saying, can I donate to the Cardano Foundation, saying, I now will have the foundation come to us, the ADA holder, and say, we have done X and we want Y for that. And then you get to go ahead and decide, well, what are we going to do with it? Just like the congressman gets to decide. That's the concept of a treasury. What's really nice about it is that it creates a very different level of communication and accountability, and it creates a different level of maturity within the ecosystem. Because implicit in this conversation, it's not just about, do I like the foundation or not? It's very easy to create things that are likable. It's all about instead saying, well, among the pool of possibilities of all the things we could be spending money on and funding and getting going, is this the best thing to fund? Now, here's the beautiful thing about having that conversation. It actually stops community splits and forks, because you're talking to each other. You're communicating with each other. You're coming up with a strategy. If you say, we're going to give 10% of all available treasury funds to the foundation, somewhere in that conversation is saying, this is so essential to our ecosystem that it deserves that much funding. And we believe in the vision direction of this organization so much that we're willing to give them that kind of responsibility and so forth. So you have control, you have a voice, you have a way of influencing, you have a way of steering the direction. And as a consequence, you feel like you're heard. You had a chance to express yourself, that the decisions the ecosystem are making are legitimized in some way, as opposed to having no control. I don't get to control Bitcoin. I don't have a voice. If I disagree with what a very small group of people are doing, the odds of me changing their minds or influencing that process is very small. Even if I can do it, the odds are most other people can't do it. And as a consequence, it dramatically increases the situation where minorities will say, screw this, we're done, we're voting with our feet, and let's create cash or classic or gold or whatever the heck the latest fork flavor of the week is going to be. So the short answer is, as a foundation, probably. The longer answer is, if we've done our job right, we can get the best of all worlds, where people can be able to get the same output of a donation, but they get more certainty. And also we create a conversation that can better establish the direction of the ecosystem as a whole, which is what we need if this thing is going to be real. Yeah, The Law is a very good book. Hi, Charles. Can you please talk about your plans for Plutus hackathons and getting devs on board to learn Plutus? Thanks very much. So the good news is that Plutus already has a fan base and a user base. And when you're creating new things, it is really a good idea to go niche. People have this idea that somehow, some way, the only way you're going to get mass adoption is if you start with something that already has mass adoption and it's already out there. But guys, at the end of the day, smart contracts are completely new things. We've never had this type of infrastructure before. We've never had this type of coding practice before. We've never coupled these things in the way that they've been coupled before. So regardless of whether you're approaching this from a C# or Java or JavaScript viewpoint, at the end of the day, you're living in a reality where, you're going to have to learn new tricks and new things. So then the question is, does the fact that you can do these new things with a language you're already familiar with somehow, some way, dramatically increase your potential to do them? In other words, are you entering the space because you can use Java and you say, why not? Or are you entering the space because you want to do something in that space and you're looking for tools that will allow you to do things within that space. So I feel, statistically speaking, that it's the latter instead of the former. We have a situation where people will be willing to learn new languages, new frameworks, and new development patterns to be able to write software in our space. We have empirical, historical evidence for this, with the cell phone revolution, with the 32-bit revolution, and so forth. Time and again, it's proven that a certain class of developers, not all of them, but a certain subset of them, were very willing to do interesting things and come in space. Now, what we've done is we said if we go niche, we have a chance of getting those first adopters, very passionate, very involved, to write great software and show that great things can be done. The difference between your average JavaScript developer and your Haskell developer is no one ever started with Haskell as their first language, unless they were so privileged to go to Edinburgh or Glasgow or a very small group of computer science institutions. Most Haskell developers are a little older, a little grayer in the beard, and have decades of experience, and are experts not only in development engineering, but also computer science. Duncan Coutts is a great example of that. So who would you rather be writing the future financial applications of the world? Your JavaScript developer that went to Hack Reactor or took a course on Code Academy or something like that, has very little experience, can't read a specification, does not really know how to use cryptography properly, and has some idea of how to develop, or somebody who's an expert engineer who has years of engineering experience and is very systematic, mature, and methodical. Now, we're not talking about all developers. We're just talking about the beginning, the bootstrap of your ecosystem. One of the reasons why a large majority of dApps in Ethereum don't work or are riddled with security flaws. We had things like the DAO hack because the initial group of developers who were developing for Ethereum were pretty junior. Some were experts in doing great work, and there's some great examples of that if you look at Solidity Code, where it's incredibly well written. But the system was over-accessible, and it emphasized mass adoption when it made no sense to emphasize mass adoption, because we didn't have in the Ethereum ecosystem a lot of things figured out that you need to figure out to be able to comfortably write code. This JavaScript suffered from the exact same problem, as did PHP. And that's the reason why during the 1990s and the early 2000s, the vast majority of websites and servers that used PHP or JavaScript were riddled with code errors, efficiency problems, security flaws, et cetera, and the consequence of this was billions and billions of dollars of economic damage and a really bad user experience and just a really horrible time getting the web to a better state. And then there was adoption of professional tools and frameworks and better training. And now if you look at the enterprise JS developers, the enterprise PHP developers, they're very competent, they're very skilled, and it's hardened with lots of expertise. So in my view, when you're trying to prove out an ecosystem and show that an ecosystem can really do something special, you invite the best to that party. And we felt that by going niche with Plutus, in Haskell, this would give us the best opportunity to do that. This is a group that, for the most part, has not come to the smart contract party. They like their tools. They like their ecosystem. We're going to try to bring that group in first. And our conjecture is that group is going to create magical, amazing, incredible experiences that are really going to be exciting. And as a consequence, it's going to bring a lot of people into the ecosystem. Now, the good news is it's actually not that hard or expensive to train people to learn how to use these types of techniques if they really want to. And we've proven this empirically with 2 courses we've run, one in Athens and one in Barbados, and starting January 8th in Ethiopia with an all-women's class. We have a Haskell course we've created. We've partnered with Jason King and his organization to MOOCify that class that we're doing in Ethiopia, and our goal is to train 10,000 developers throughout the world within a 12 to 18-month period post-class in Ethiopia. So that will be the starting set. And on the back of that, we'll build great frameworks and great tools to get people into that ecosystem. If we bet wrong, we have a backup plan. That's Yella, which we will continue to invest heavily in. And that'll allow everything in the Ethereum ecosystem work at our ecosystem. And eventually people to port over Java and C# and so forth. So it's important, I think, to have a strategy on both sides. My conjecture is by going niche, We can deliver a great experience, great applications, which are far more secure and actually solve real-life problems. We have a path to train lots of people. And all of that educational material will be completely open source, books, videos, and other material. You guys can consume that. You gals can consume that any way you want. And then if we get it wrong, we have a plan B. And if one works and the other one works, great. It's like having two redundant systems. All right, let's look for the last one. I love comments like this. Cardano has no smart contracts it can use today like blockchains already have. We have 3 test nets. You can run Plutus contracts, you can run EVM contracts, and you can run Yellow contracts. What would you like to deploy them onto the system? What can you deploy today to Ethereum? Well, Ray, what can you deploy today that you don't have to also connect to a server if it operates at scale? Go ahead and create Uber on a blockchain. You come back to me and tell me how much your operating cost is on Ethereum for that, or EOS, or any of these other guys. It's a pipe dream. It's a pipe dream. I could fork Ethereum any day with my own software and give you guys an EVM. Great. Have I innovated? Have I given you a good development experience? Have I given you a secure environment to write these things in, good languages to write these things in? No. And nor have the competitors. They don't have anything that we have. They just don't. They have a fantasy that in 2017 was worth a lot of money, and in 2018 disintegrated. And over 94% the value is lost in the big player, the Ethereum side. So I just love being lectured that we're just a white paper. We have over 40, half of which have gone through peer review. So on that account, we're a damn good white paper, and that we have no functionality when in fact we do, and we ship 4 major updates, or you can't run smart contracts because you can. What have you built? Take your Solidity code, run it on our testnet. Show me that you've actually tried to do something in our ecosystem. Because let's say I had that feature. Would you actually be using it there, Ray? No, you wouldn't. You're just an asshole troll. And you know what? Our ecosystem's littered with you people. And history is littered with you people. Here you go. This is a cuneiform tablet of a message that was written in 1800 BC by a gentleman who was complaining about the quality of his copper. 4,000 years of history, people are still shitposting and trolling. Whether it be Babylon or it be here, it doesn't really matter. If you're going to do great things, you have to take the time that they deserve. Beautiful things take time. Ecosystems take time. Functionality and good features takes time. What we have done with this project is we have gotten the brightest people in the world across many different institutions and made them care about our space, our needs. They didn't give a shit about our space 5 years ago. They care now. They write papers now. They write code now. We've created a lingua franca for our space. If you look at all of our specifications, ledger specifications, delegation specifications, consensus specifications, network specifications, wallet specifications, in math, implementation independent. Our scientists can read them, our engineers can read them, and domain experts eventually will be able to read them. So we can actually have a conversation of what is a wallet. None of our competitors did that. Either they took old ideas from the 1980s and bolted some sort of voting system on top and said, look how amazing we are. Or they took Ethereum and forked it and said they're the world's best standard, and they just shit-faced lots of crap like certain blockchains have done, or bought companies to achieve legitimacy. Or they created a model that was horrendously expensive and insecure and accomplished nothing and evaporated 94% of its value. So that's what we've done. If you don't think that's an accomplishment, great. You should probably leave the space because no one's accomplished anything by your standards. Okay. One last question, and I got to get going. Where in Wyoming are you moving IOHK to? Cheyenne, Wyoming. Got my boots and everything. We had to make a decision about where's the world financial system going to go in the next 5 years to 10 years. And we looked at a lot of different places, and we had a lot of different conversations, and we looked at where regulation's at, the global economy's at. And, originally we said that there was going to be a great financial pivot to Asia. And to a certain extent, that's occurring. And we looked at the values of the things we care about. And if you look at where China's going with social credit and gradually transforming Hong Kong and Taiwan and other places, at the end of the day, they may have marketplaces and a lot of power and money, but the Soviet Union had a lot of power and money. It didn't make anything they did or thought legitimate or right. And I do not want to live in a world where everything I do is controlled by an algorithm. Where when I go to the supermarket, if I grab the bag of pork rinds, I lose some social credit. If I grab the broccoli, I gain some social credit because it's quote unquote healthier. If I spit on the sidewalk, I lose some social credit. If I ride the train without buying a ticket, I lose some credit. Some people somewhere may think that this is a good idea, but the concept that somebody gets to be judge, jury, and executioner for your fate, and that person you didn't elect, that person you have no influence over, is everything that is against what we've accomplished as a species, and it's against the Enlightenment. Despite all of our problems, I still feel that the United States is one of the freest countries in the world. And I still feel the United States has the best potential to be a great innovator and a great foundation to innovate from. I'm biased, I'm an American. But at the end of the day, we still have a constitution. We still have checks and balances. Yes, we have ups and downs. But just imagine how good it would be for the world if the things we do wrong are corrected by the philosophies of cryptocurrencies. All that power, all that control could then be liberated and turned into something that's good for the world as opposed to bad for the world. So from a philosophical dimension, it really does make a lot of sense to me to try to help home a bit. And we're already starting to see cracks. There's discussions about property registration on a blockchain, voting on a blockchain, issuing of securities on a blockchain. And little by little, if we get these things to take hold and these tentacles to dig deep, eventually these things will turn into political influence and overcome the existing system. And frankly, we are due for major changes in our country. We cannot continue to have the political systems we have and expect that we're not going to descend into a civil war. And our foundations are not strong in that respect, yet our people are strong. We still have the smartest, we still have the best, and we still have the most innovation. Not because we make them at home, but because all the people who do these things tend to still come here. The reason why we are now #1 in the world for making rocket engines is because someone left South Africa to come to the United States. So as a consequence, I think that Wyoming in particular, and the United States in particular, has a great potential for us to do a lot of good. But this doesn't change the global nature of our company. We're operating in 16 countries, from Argentina to Japan, and we'll continue to do that. Our enterprise portfolio continues to be Pan-African in focus, and we're going to continue looking outward. But I just don't want to base my company's future and fate in Hong Kong when I see what's happening in China continue to happen. And if I have to relocate, it's only 3.5% extra taxes to be in the U.S. It makes it organizationally and bureaucratically speaking significantly simpler. And it means that we now get to take a lot of the things that we're doing and bring them home and make my own backyard a little bit better. Some people, they get so tired of things, they just leave, renounce their citizenships and say our best days are behind us. But if we're unwilling to fix our home, then how can we judge other people for not fixing their homes? If we're unwilling to change our society and make our society better, then how can we judge other people for the problems in their societies? I have no right to criticize social credit if I'm not here trying to avoid it occurring in my own country. And the only way I can do that is to have an economic voice in addition to my own voting rights that I have. So anyway, guys, an hour and 40 minutes. This was a heck of a lot of fun. Thank you so much for participating, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and I'll see everyone in January. Cheers.